Hi everyone. Thank you all for joining. I think we've got a 1 hour slot today for this particular webinar, and we have two main speakers. One of which Nikki North, one of our esteemed customers from NewDay. I'd like to hand it over for a brief introduction, but I'd like to probably describe Nikki as industry veteran. I think I've called you that before, haven't I? Which I think you are okay with that. So if you'd like to introduce yourself briefly, Nikki, that'd be great.
Yes, thanks, Ollie. That's quite an introduction, I suppose, on its own. Hi. So I'm Nikki North. I am the Intelligent Automation Product Manager at NewDay, looking after a number of systems, but mainly focusing on RPA. And as Ollie mentioned, I've been doing this for a very long time. So I think this is my 17th year in the RPA industry. So lots of exciting things to talk about today. And thanks for inviting me to chat.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Nikki. And we also have Adrian Golding with us, who's our VP of Customer Success at C2. But Adrian, would you like to give a brief introduction?
Hi, Nikki. Hi, Ollie. So my name is Adrian Golding. I'm the Vice President of Customer Success at C2. My responsibilities are really post-sale. So for us, that's our professional services team, our CSM team, and our training team and technical support team, all designed really around helping customers be successful with the product and working with them to help change their business and deliver on ROI and broader business benefits. So glad to be here. Looking forward to it.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Adrian. Last but not least, I forgot to introduce myself. So I'm Ollie Fulljames. I'm the Enterprise Sales Director at C2 within the European region. I'm here to moderate today, but absolutely about to hand over to Nikki to really start the show. So over to you, Nikki.
Thank you. Hi, right, thanks very much. So could you just have the first slide, please? Thanks. So everybody, if you're in a role where you're there's loads of different titles for it, head of RPA or Centre of Excellence lead, whatever, you'll have seen or you'll have had a look at lots of different bits of software. And I first just wanted to tell you a little background about my career, which is, it sort of explains why I really resonated with C2 as an application and why it's something that really stood out to me as something that would definitely make a difference for us. So as you can see there, my career dates back very, very, very far to 2006. My first job was a controller. We were on version 1 of Blue Prism, and we didn't have virtualized environments. We had desktops and switch boxes. So we had a little room that was locked away, and a little keypad on the door. We had a chair that we had to sort of roll up and down all the PCs all day long, making sure they stayed awake, making sure they stayed logged in, and they were running all the processes. We also didn't have work queues, which is one of the fundamentals of the Blue Prism software today. Everything we did in control room was by SQL tables, and we had to do queries. So if we wanted to know how many were left in a queue, or if we wanted to set something to exception outside of the process, it was all SQL queries that we had to perform. So it was quite an intense job, lots of things, and anyone who's not technical like myself, who's ever tried to do anything in SQL, you can be prone to making mistakes, and I may have deleted the odd database table in my time. And another thing we did was that we didn't have was schedulers. So if you wanted to kick a process off, you literally had to wait for the time and you would just drag and drop it into the control room. So my day originally, back in 2006, was a huge list of processes. And when it got to 8 o'clock, I'd have a set of like 4 or 5 processes I had to manually kick off, keep an eye on them and that sort of thing. So if we fast forward quite a few years to 2012, we moved on to version 4 of Blue Prism, which for anyone who knows the history, it was a revolutionary version of Blue Prism, where it moved to a model of training developers up and selling the software rather than selling it as a sort of a service. And with that came the virtualization of environments. So we got out of our little lock room, we were able to, mix with everybody else and sit at the same desk as everybody else and have our virtualized environment. And we got work queues. So as a controller, I could see what was in the queue, where things had come in, all the different things that you can use and access as a controller from work queues, being able to do different sort of filters to be able to see and answer questions and queries for the business teams that you were trying to manage. And finally, eventually, the introduction of a scheduler, which meant that we were able to just kick processes off and put them in the scheduler, and everything would start, and it would also retry as well, something we didn't have back in 2006. So then we get to today, version 7 of Blue Prism in the current Centre of Excellence that I look after. And now we've got C2, which kind of sits across all that, does the intelligent orchestration, delivers automated operations for us. And it also has capabilities for human in the loop and some business intelligence dashboard. And I think that little story, hopefully you can see how far that's come, and you can see my little controller brain from 2006 looking at C2 and thinking how incredible it would be, and all the things that it would be able to do for us, and all the things it would make much, much easier in our day job. So that's just a little bit of a potted history of sort of my journey with Control Room in Blue Prism. So next slide, please. So first of all, on the right-hand side, we've got a little bit of information about NewDay. So we're a financial services provider, and our purpose is to help people move forward with credit. We provide 1 in 6 credit cards in the UK, with 146 million transactions processed each year. And we have around 5 million customers. And of those customers, around 2 million of those, we've actually helped them to improve our credit scores. That's one of our main purposes, like I say, with helping people move forward, is being able to provide coaching and support through some of our online applications that allow people to get better with credit. And as an intelligent automation team, just over on the left, that's one of the things that we try to support. So we're a very small centre of excellence in-house that was established with a partner probably about 5 years ago. We're a small team, as I said, of 6 people. But over the years, we've managed to automate around 80 processes. But by the end of last year, about 52 of those were live in production. And the saving of that is around 6,500 hours a month, which equates roughly to about 60 FTE. And we put through an average of about 120,000 pieces of automation through the robots each month. And we have a very, very low exception rate, which we're very proud of, which is less than 5%. I think last month it was around 2%. So that's kind of the setup that we've got at NewDay. I joined NewDay in January of 2021. 2022. And the year before that, we had a bigger team. 2 of them were controllers. One of the controllers left in the middle of that year, but a developer also left at the same time. Our remaining controller took on the developer role. So essentially it left us with a suite of developers and no controllers. And we were just kind of doing Control Room off the side of desk with developers. It was something that was there. We had a bit of a rota for people to come in and look at it in the morning, but it very much disrupted our sort of sprint planning and our ability to plan effectively, because we didn't know when we were necessarily going to be dragged off to do extra additional work that came into the control room. The team that I joined just prior to me starting did a huge amount of work in some continuous improvement to make the control room more efficient, because obviously it needed someone to look after it a little bit more. And it did come a long way, but it still was taking about half an FTE's worth of resource every day to look after that control room. And that's why we decided to work with C2. So over the next slide, please. So the implementation and speed to value is something that I'll just cover here, just so you can see how quickly we managed to implement the system and how quickly we managed to see the benefits of it. So on day 1, we had the software, if we take that as the day that we had the software fully implemented. Day 2 and 3, we put a small number of processes into the system, onboarded them, and just did a little bit of testing to get a little bit of confidence. On day 4, because of the confidence that we did have, we put the full suite of processes in, so we could get the instant benefit realization from that. So it literally was as quick as between day 1 and day 4, all sort of 52 processes loaded and fully running through the C2 software. The second week, we started to reduce effort for monitoring, because even though we had some confidence in it, we weren't just leaving it to do its own thing. We were kind of keeping a check on it, especially in the morning. And the developers were just building the confidence that they could just leave it and back off a little bit. By week 3, we had a further reduction in the sort of manual review activity that we were doing. And then on week 4, we took a step where, so what I didn't mention was that because of the issues that we sometimes had out of hours with our VDIs, just not connected, I'm sure anyone who's worked in RPA for a number of years may have had this issue. We put in place that the developers would just come in on a Saturday at the goodness of their hearts, just because if they came in and just did an hour or 2 check on a Saturday, it just meant that the day was a little bit easier on a Monday. So that had been implemented before I joined, and that was something that we stopped straight away, because they found that when they were coming in, there was no issues, and there was nothing really that we needed to pick up anymore, because the automated operation part of C2 was picking that up, rebooting the VDIs and restarting the processes. So we knocked that on the head quite quickly as well. Just another thing that happened within that sort of 4-week window is we did have a target system outage. So one of the systems of a third party that we use to process some things had an outage for around 6 hours. And usually with something like that, depending on the time of day that it is, this one happened to happen up until about 3 o'clock. We essentially, normally we would need a developer to stay on, rejig some of the processes, get everything sort of in a better order and make sure that we didn't miss any SLAs. And someone at 3 o'clock in the afternoon would mean they would be staying on till about 6, 7 o'clock at night to make sure that happened. But with C2, basically within an hour or two, everything was completely up to date. All the processes have been sort of reordered, kicked off, and we had 100% SLA adherence. So that was a nice good use case for us as well, to see the additional benefits that it brought for us when we had those sort of unplanned outages. Next slide, please. And this is just a little graph to show you the capacity. So the top line in blue is when we were just simply using the standard Blue Prism control room, and that's the amount of licenses we were using at capacity. And then the pinkish line underneath just kind of shows you, as soon as we implemented C2, where we would see the peaks of the troughs that we had, where we had some sort of more availability in the evening, but we had some spikes at specific times in the day. If you can just click on to the next slide for me as well. We did a little bit of process improvement, and we did some work with C2 to put in some things like file triggers and that sort of thing. And you can see the darker line there. It's not very noticeable, but we're starting to try to flatten the line out a little bit. So we're trying to use some of the out of hours capability there later in the evening, and to bring some of the morning capability down a little bit. And we've still got quite a bit of work to do on that, but it's more because of the business demands that we've got. You know, anyone who's worked with business teams, especially in an RPA field, will know everything needs to be done at 8 o'clock in the morning, or, you know, everyone's got the same request for SLAs, so they can work their exceptions in the same day. So it's just negotiating with the business that we're working on now to try and flatten the curve a little bit, and get some better capability or capacity, across the day. And then the next slide. Yeah, so just a little touch on what's next. We use Trust Portal for our human in the loop tool, and we're just migrating to an enhanced offering of that at the minute. And that's something that we'll be looking to get the sort of maximum capacity out of. I did mention file triggers. We have put most of those in now, but that's something that we'll obviously be making sure that we use with all new processes going forward. There is human in the loop technology within C2, and we're just looking at the different use cases in which we could use that, as opposed to where we use Trust Portal for our contact centers. We're looking at different use cases for using the human in the loop stuff that comes with C2, maybe for kicking off processes or managing exceptions into specific teams, things like that. We are looking to migrate our RPA mainframe from sort of green screen scraping into API integration. We're moving away from any UI interaction as well that we do. We are looking at Power Automate a little bit. I think I'm going to cover that a little bit later on, some of the things we've been doing with that. And we're looking at potentially process redesign as well, to make sure we get the maximum efficiency out of the C2 platform. And I think that's the end of the slides. Thank you. Well, I think you're on mute there, Adrian. Oh, you've come.
Am I?
Yeah, you're all right now.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, just saying, fascinating story, and thanks for sharing it. And it's always nice to hear that we're helping, but I think more importantly that, you know, the business impact of how we're helping is really important as well. Things like the savings stand out in terms of how you've managed to quantify that, which is really interesting. I'm just really pleased that you've got out of your 2006 room and continued with RPA. So I think I might have given up at that stage. So well done you. You touched on automated operations. I mean, I think one of the things that we like to say at C2 is it just works. Mm-hmm. But that in reality, I think, provides other opportunities. So when you think about the time not spent restarting robots, and think about the time that the team aren't necessarily there out of hours doing stuff, how's that enabled you to progress into other areas, or at least expand your plans further than what you would have been?
Yeah, so what we've decided to do with that sort of additional time is looking to diversify away from just enterprise RPA and look at some desktop automation. So I mentioned looking at Power Automate. I think Power Automate is a very different tool to Blue Prism for obvious reasons, but I think it leans potentially a bit more towards citizen development as well. That's not something that we're looking to explore at the moment with enterprise RPA, but definitely something that we're looking to explore. So rather than us sort of building and delivering automations, looking at education, support, putting together a playbook of when's the right time to use automation, and educating the business, not necessarily on how to use the tool, but when to use the tool and to understand the pitfalls of using that tool, and how it can impact other things. So when big change comes along, they're not going to consider the little automations that you've built on your desktop to help you. So you just need to make sure it's manageable, and that we're not sharing things unnecessarily around the business. So we're looking to focus a little bit more on that and create some leadership in that space rather than process automation delivery.
Great. Thanks for that. Just in terms of perception of RPA in the business, we've obviously got some great results that you shared, but how's that sort of viewed more broadly and also at leadership level? What types of conversations do you have there, and how's that resonate with them?
Yeah, so at a leadership level, the perception of RPA is definitely more fluid, in that, and what I mean by that is the perception of it changes over time, or they appreciate that the use cases for it will change over time.
Right.
So our strategy when we first brought it in was that, classic big hitters, low hanging fruit. Let's get some of the big operational processes out of the operation, free up some time, free up some hours for the guys, and give those operational teams some time back. Over the past few years, we developed our own in-house platform, which we're rolled out through the business for all sorts of different elements. And the vision now is that as that rolls out, because that's full sort of API integration, we'll remove some of the RPA processes, or most of the RPA processes, or we may use them as sort of temporary. So if we want to launch if we wanted to launch one of the platforms as an MVP, we were using some of the RPA processes to kind of just hold that up while we then delivered some of the extra features, and that sort of thing. And we're also focusing now more on supporting our employees and innovation. So a couple of examples of that more recently, we've been working with Experian on a vulnerable customer hub. It's a pilot that Experian are doing, and we're one of the sort of pilot financial services companies that's been working with them. So we don't know if Experian are going to carry it on. We don't know if it's going to work. And if it does work, we don't know if it'll work in its current form or if the requirements will be the same. So a low cost option to mean there's no impact to the business is to automate it through RPA. So we've got that process automated now. If it does roll out, we know there's going to be loads of different versions of it. We can do that sort of low cost and low speed to get that working. And then when it is, when it's got its final version, we can then migrate that over to a proper sort of platform solution, but without having to put all that investment in up front for it then not to maybe pan out because it's not something that's in our control. And we've also done very recently a sort of offer to support some of our vulnerable customers, a financial offer. We didn't know how much it'd be uptaken. We didn't know what sort of support we'd get for that. So again, we decided to use a combined RPA Salesforce and sort of a data management type process, just to prove it. It's got a really good uptake, and now we're looking again to move that into the platform. So it's allowing us at quite a quick speed but low cost to invest in some of these innovative ideas of doing something a bit different, and then we'll move it to platforms or more permanent solutions when we know it's going to work.
Great, good to hear. And it sounds like you've sort of cracked the nut, I guess, of pushing automation versus a pull from the business. For want of a better word.
Yeah, definitely. So almost all of our workload does come from business teams coming to us because they've already got something that's automated by us. They get a new piece of work, and the first thing they do is go, "Oh, can you automate this for us?" Because we're, they've got other things to be doing, and it's just something additional that comes through. And they know as well what's appropriate to be automated as well, because we have a presence in all of the environments. We've got some really good stakeholders within our business that are really good champions for us.
Great, making lives easier around the business. Yeah. Nice position. You've spoken a lot about operational stability, and I think we talked about people not having to go in on weekends. I'm guessing that's a plus point for them as individuals, doing it out of their own goodwill. Are there any other unexpected benefits you've got across the business outside of that sort of team morale and operational hours?
Yeah, definitely. I think something that we weren't anticipating happened literally only a couple of weeks ago, actually. So the offer that I talked about, the sort of financial support offer that we were putting out for some of our more vulnerable customers, we ended up getting about 300% of the expected volumes. And we've done an impact assessment based on the volumes we were expecting. We were like, yeah, that's fine. We'll be able to cope with that. And when we got the volumes that came through at obviously much, much higher, I can hand on heart say without C2, I don't think we would have been able to cope, and we would have maybe had to reduce some of the numbers or back off a little bit on it. But we were able to harness the intelligent orchestration to essentially have this process running in every single gap of processing that we had. So the graphs I showed you before where it was showing, oh, we've got lower capacity. If I showed you them now, they would have just been at like the full sort of capacity the whole way through. But because a lot of that was done at the weekends as well to catch up on processing, without having people there to jig the processes around and manage the control room, I don't know how we would have done that without a lot of manual oversight. So that was not something that we'd really anticipated. This is a one-off process. When we talk about the history of NewDay, we've not really done a process that's had this sort of impact before, or unpredicted impact. So yeah, it was really beneficial to have that there.
Right.
Yeah,
we've actually had some feedback from one customer before, described it as Tetris, sort of working in the background where it's just moving them all around just to make sure it works, basically. It's not the first time we've spoken. I know we've caught up before. One of the things I found really interesting was just the view of risk management, I think, from an introduction of C2, or at least the operation itself, in terms of how that benefited the business.
Yeah, definitely. So with our RPA operation, obviously, it's something that we have to manage our risks around. Anyone, again, who's worked with RPA knows that processes will fail. There's lots of technical things we can do to try and support processes not failing, but it's kind of a given that processes are going to fail for a number of reasons. The most important thing for us is to reduce the impact of when there's failures, and that's what we've really been able to help. That C2's really been able to help us with. So we've got a number of risks that we're managing, and we've been able to use the implementation of C2 to bring down the impact scores on that. Because if something happens out of hours, that's no longer the same impact that it was before. So if you look at your worst case scenario, that impact score has definitely come down. That's helped us to sort of rescore those risks and helped us with that, definitely.
Right. Yeah, quite a scientific approach as well with the scoring and the metric. Yeah. Good to hear. We touched on Power Automate. Have you got any other AI tools that you're looking at, I think, or technologies that you're thinking about using in the future, and part of that you're being in your ecosystem?
Yeah, so at the minute we're more focusing on upgrades of the current environment that we've got. So we've recently done an upgrade of our RPA platform. We are currently migrating to a SaaS version of, I mentioned, Trust Portal that we use for our Human in the Loop tool. And we are migrating to a SaaS version of, we use Abby for OCR. So we've got quite a lot of things going on there. And I expect the second half of the year, when all those upgrades are completed or migrations, is what we need to do is really tap into the additional value that gives us. So similar to C2, we've got some stuff on for the dashboards to make sure we get the value out of those. And with any upgrade, there's always new functionality that we can explore. So we've got a lot of that going on. As a company, NewDay do have their own data scientist team. So as part of our platform, we've got lots of artificial intelligence things going on in there. But in my team, we're potentially going to be more looking at process and task mining. Did have a little dabble with it last year. There's a couple of reasons it didn't really work. But we're looking at potentially a different use case and a different angle that we might come at that. So that's kind of the next thing on the list to make sure we don't just want to use it for the sake of saying, oh, we've got this another cool tool that we can use and just add something to the list of things to use. I'm very hesitant to do that. So we're just working on potentially a really strong use case to make sure we get a successful kind of proof of value from that.
About oversharing, any learnings you can share on what didn't work?
Just ensure that your the business teams that you wanting to work with are engaged, but stay engaged as well. I think the problem was the transition of leadership with me sort of joining the business meant that there was a big dip in the sort of program getting going. By the time we got everything back up and running, the sort of business had moved on, and it became more of a hassle for them than something that they really felt they were going to get benefit from. So, yeah. So
partnership and consistent benefit discussion, realization, just to keep it on track. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for sharing that. What's next for the program? We've heard lots of good stuff about where you've got to now. You've shared around some of the technologies you're looking at. If you took it up another level, where's that taking you in the next sort of 1-2 years?
So as I said, as a company, we're kind of trying to wind down what we're using for RPA. So there is definitely a place for us. We've got a full pipeline for our roadmap at the minute, but we're not on the trajectory to. We're not sort of escalating. We're not looking to scale any more than we currently are. And like I say, we're looking more to focus on making our employees day to day a little bit. So not things that are going to give us big cost savings or big hour savings and things like that, but just things that are going to support our colleagues. A recent example of something we've done is which doesn't potentially add much of a tangible business benefit, as you may say, from a sort of FTE perspective, is we have our teams of virtual floor walkers that support our contact center. Obviously, it used to be actual floor walkers, but now, with hybrid working, those are now virtual floor walkers. They're still real people, by the way, but there's sort of a line that people can call to speak to a virtual floor walker. And everything that people call up about is registered, and it used to be registered on loads of different spreadsheets. And then it was sort of one poor lady got 20 spreadsheets a day from the 20 different floor walkers, had to amalgamate everything, and then somehow had to try and gain some value from what was happening. So what we've done is we've implemented a trust portal form with Blue Prism at the back of it, which they have got. We've got a direct pull of all the agents. They can select the agent that called. We've got loads of different topics they can select, and then we've got some feedback they can select as well. So is it something that should have been on the hub, something that should have been trained out in a huddle, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And we sort of collate all that information, and then we pass it back through to our business MI team, who presents them with some dashboards of topics that keep coming up a lot, because it's hard for 20 different people to keep a track on the one thing that keeps coming up regularly. So that's given them some insight. So we can't necessarily tangibly say, oh, it might have saved that lady an hour a day, but that's not the reason we did it. It's to help those teams to get that right feedback and to be able to have the insights that they need to be able to train people and reduce those calls as much as possible, so customers can be dealt with right first time.
Yeah, it sounds like you've got the business to a place where there's clearly some ROI that you can prove, but intuitively people just accept that there's benefits in doing what you're doing, which gives you quite a nice long runway to play around and help in additional areas that maybe, as you say, there may not be a justifiable ROI from day one, but actually you're adding benefit in a softer way, which is great to hear as well. Yeah. And from an industry perspective, what do you see happening in the next, given that you're a veteran, as Ollie says? I'm going to use the word experience, but veteran sounds quite good. What do you see happening in the next sort of 3 to 5 years from an industry? What would you like to see?
So I think there's two sort of main things, I think. So the first one, I think there's going to be a lot of focus on more sort of personal assistant automation, so things like Microsoft Copilot that I know's come out recently, and people, I think, more using things like Power Automate to their own sort of daily tasks. We've got an example of someone who, when HR approves a holiday, it blocks their calendar out. It probably didn't take that long to build, but it's things that just make everyone's days a little bit easier. But I think the main thing's got to be sort of generative AI, chat GTP, it's a GPT, gosh, I always get it wrong, it's absolutely everywhere. And I think there is a lot of hype around it. I think the difference I'm seeing with this is that it's the first time I think the hype is in the consciousness of like everybody in the public, rather than just, the LinkedIn AI community or whatever. It's kind of everywhere, because I saw a comment, I can't remember who it was, and I can't remember the numbers, but say there was 1 million users of chat GTP, there was like 999,999 students and one software engineer. So I think that's kind of something that I think there's lots of people using it in day-to-day life, but I think, and so there's a lot of hype about it. I think there's a lot of negativity about it as well. People that don't necessarily understand the industry think it's going to take all sorts of things away. But I think there's lots and lots of steps we need to take before we get in a position where we can de-risk it, and it's going to be palatable to be using just in general for businesses to be able to consume as more of a service, rather than just, like say, students using it to cheat on the homework. But it's definitely going to be very powerful. I think the hype, though, is like probably not much I've seen before, because of the transition into the wider public as well.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. I was at the event yesterday, actually. We talked about like plussing up team members for the use of it, basically, and I think if you think about a business, you're probably looking at profit and loss impact or risk management from the use or implementation. But that plussing up, and I think that's probably only applies to a few small use cases as well, but you can effectively upskill someone quite considerably in their day job if you're applying it in the right way. But lots of research to get done first to prove that out, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And finally, given that you're a veteran, I'm probably saying it too much now. What's the one piece of advice you give to others that you are working on an RPA program or just embarking on it or in the middle of it? Basically, any learnings you can share there would be really useful.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's always lots of different individual bits of advice I could give on specific topics, but I think overarching what I would say is whenever you're trying to make certain decisions, really the answer a lot of the time is just it depends, and there's not necessarily a set blueprint for how to do something. There's lots of frameworks out there to help you. There's lots of forums, and everyone's got a different experience, and your RPA journey will be your RPA journey, and it won't be the same as anybody else's. So, you know, once you've decided, especially at the beginning, if you decide your software vendor, that's obviously your biggest kind of decision to make. But after that, there'll be lots of things that's like, well, do I have an offshore team? Do I have an in-house team? Is it set up by a sort of consultancy service, or do we set it up internally? Do we use waterfall? Do we use agile? Do we re-engineer a process, or do we automate the process broken? And I could honestly give you examples of all those different things where the answer can be either, and it really just depends, potentially on a process by process basis. And I'll give you an example of that. If we talk about sort of offshore or outsourced teams versus in-house teams. So in a previous role, we had a really, really successful setup using an offshore team for build. So what we decided to do was we had a smaller number of developers in-house, in our team. We used them to do the design and to do the design, and basically we would offshore the build to the offshore team who would do it, send it back, and it'd be peer reviewed by developers. It would be tested, like unit tested offshore, then it'd come back and we would do the UAT testing in our test team, and it would be deployed into the business, and not all that would be onshore. So essentially we were just outsourcing that build element. It worked really, really well. It meant that because if you've got a few developers and all they have to do is do the design of the process and then peer review it without having to do the weeks and weeks of build, it was really efficient, and it allowed us to flex up when we had bigger processes and things coming in, and it worked really, really well. However, when we looked at our control room, way before C2 existed, this is still many, many years ago, and we looked at outsourcing that, and because of the cost model on that element, I found it really restrictive. So the scenario I was in is I think I had say 97 processes, and the costing we were given was up to 100 processes. So my major red flag was, right, well, what happens when I get 101 processes? And what if that 101th process is half an FTE? How does that justify going into the cost bracket of up to 110, 120, whatever that was? And so I saw that as a really inflexible model of how to do my control room, because the controllers I had back then, you know, they were great, but they wouldn't be like, oh, I've got one too many processes, I'm not doing my job today. They just got on with it. Some processes were temporary. They're only going to run them for a couple of weeks. So the flexibility you got, or that my team had for the control room, was definitely much better in-house and onshore. So that's just in the same team, in the same company, two different decisions. One was to go with offshore, and one was to stay with onshore. And it just kind of shows that it really does depend. And if you've got a community of either other sort of heads of RPA or anything like that, developers, whatever your role is, just reach out to that community and try and share experiences, attend things like this, listen to people's journeys, and don't be afraid to reach out and ask specific questions if you've got specific topics that you need help or support on.
And your email address is?
It's on LinkedIn. Joking aside, more than happy for anyone to reach out if they have got questions, because all I can do is share my experience. There is no right or wrong answer.
Yeah, no, I think that's great advice, actually. I think there's lots of frameworks, playbooks, whatever you want to call them out there, and they're all valid to some degree. But as you say, it's a specific use case you're applying it to, and that gets lost in translation. So, the more you can think it through for your own specific use case, the better off you're going to be, I think.
I think a lot of problems come trying to shoehorn a specific framework or into a business model where it just doesn't work.
Yeah. Well, a lot of the detail sat behind the decision making is not shared, is it? So it's just a presentable format that people can get their head around, but doesn't give you the context, background, etc. So brilliant. Look, thanks ever so much. Really appreciate you sharing all your skills with us, and success by all accounts, because it sounds like it's been a wonderful journey. getting you out of the room and getting you to where you are now, which is good. And yeah, thanks for giving us the time. Ollie, I don't know if you've got any questions that came in. Or
thank you. I feel sorry for Nikki. It feels like you've just done a full hour interview with her, 21 questions, but you've covered lots of the points in the comments. So if anyone does have any final questions, please do post them and we can cover them quickly. There is a question, Nikki, specifically around Power Automate in the comments, and whether you are currently integrating that with C2 or in conjunction with Blue Prism, or what your intentions are to do so in the future.
Yeah, so we have one process currently that we actually use Trust Portal and Blue Prism and Power Automate. Currently, we kind of put it live just before we got C2, so it's something that's on our future roadmap to work with you guys to kind of trying to build it under that one single sort of pane of glass view. At the minute, it's a little bit sticky plastered together, as in, you know, we drop a file, Power Automate picks it up, drops it back, and Blue Prism picks it back up and interacts with Trust Portal. So yeah, we are definitely using it, and we do want to. We basically want to use again, it goes back to it depends. We want to use the right capability for the right automation. So we're not looking to push things into specific software. We'll just review the processes as they come in. And if there's better capability in Power Automate versus Blue Prism, we'll either pick one or we'll do a hybrid model, depending on what's right for that process.
Absolutely, and I think from a C2 perspective as well, that's really what we want to see. We want to be agnostic. We want to allow our customers, our partners, to work with best of breed technologies for particular use cases or processes, and to be able to consume and take the necessary technology required and provide that single pane of glass to monitor, manage, and orchestrate all of those different types of technologies. One question from my side I have, and I think we've talked really well around kind of the centre of excellence and the benefit it has to your team. We've talked around the benefits of the business around risk mitigation and being able to automatically recover from failures, let's say, and continue to adhere to SLAs and all of that type of things. What about the human side? So one big topic, I think, at an event we were at yesterday, and I think when we last met each other, there was a big topic around, I suppose, a skills shortage within the intelligent automation space, and how you can keep your best people happier by doing the most complex, interesting work they can. How has C2 helped from that perspective as well?
Yeah, definitely. So as I mentioned earlier, first thing in the morning, one of the developers was on a rota. It was obviously a little bit more restrictive as well, because it meant that someone had to be on at 8 o'clock to make sure we're doing those checks, rather than being able to be a little bit more flexible with the hours that they worked. And yeah, so that sort of, and throughout the day, we probably estimate about half an FTE for that person will be required throughout the day. It meant a lot of handovers as well between the team, which then took additional time. And so generally, they're just in general a lot happier, because they don't have to touch it, they don't have to look at it as much. And as you say, we want them to be, we don't want developers that we're trying to develop and that are obviously paid a certain wage. We don't want them sat there looking at processes where where the original controller role had come from, because we didn't want engineers to be having to do that. And so yeah, it's freed up their time, and they're much happier that it's not something that kind of is a burden to them now. They can just get on if they want to get absolved in, whether it's Power Automate stuff, or we're looking at some of that we use Azure and things, doing some training and stuff like that. They can just switch off and they can crack on with it without having to think, oh, I need to just go and check control room and make sure nothing's fallen over or what have you.
Absolutely, no, perfect. And I think that's a key thing at the moment. Most of our, I suppose, customers, but also across the industry, is the difficulty in retaining the best people and keeping them happy. So I think it's removing that mundane, monitoring elements of, say, intelligent automation that no one included in their original business case. The fact that the more processes you build, the more you are successful. You're almost actually a victim of your own success by then having more people monitoring and babysitting these processes in production. So it's a really good, I think, element from a human perspective, not just keeping costs down, making it more reliable, but from a human perspective as well, how we can help there too.
Yeah, definitely.
The unintelligent piece of intelligent automation.
Exactly that.
Agreed.
Exactly. Just looking through the comments, I think we've covered everything in the questions. We've had plenty from Adrian as well. Any last comments, Adrian, or is that everything your side? And Nikki, any closing remarks?
No, I think that's just, I just kind of wanted to share my experience with it, and I think Adrian said it before. There was a presentation I was at and you guys were presenting and you just said it just works. And I thought, do you know what, it actually just does, because there's loads of software we've had teething problems, or it's not quite got the value straight away, and we've really struggled. And when we've had to go to our sort of leadership and present our product reviews, there's been really positive feedback there, because we've instantly been able to show the benefits as well. And that's always a nice thing to happen when you go into sort of reviews like that. So yeah, and just thanks for having me as well. It's been great to chat.
No, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for your partnership. Thank you for attending, and thank you for sharing your story. Adrian, any final remarks from yourself?
No, just to say thank you to Nikki. Actually, I think it's a good catch around the human aspects. I mean, obviously, part of automation is removing that monotony and allowing people to do more interesting jobs. It's just that kind of irony of having people that are doing that development to then sit and watch it, which is the stupidity of it, which I think is where we help quite considerably. So, yeah, we're trying to put that intelligence back in the automation if we can, which is, a good thing. So I'm pleased we're doing that for you. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you everyone for joining. Thank you, Nikki. Thank you, Adrian, for participating and making this a really productive webinar, hopefully for everyone who joined today. So, thank you, everyone. If you want to reach out, I think Nikki's offered her maybe not her personal email address, but certainly her LinkedIn. She's available. But please also reach out to myself and Adrian if there's any questions around C2 as well. Happy to share our stories.
Yeah, thanks for attending, everyone.
Thank you all. Thank you, Nikki. Cheers, Adrian.
Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.